The experiment of fascism that impulsive men are eager to carry out is a civilization project that is ultimately doomed. The only reason that fascism appears to be a path of intelligence is because it is contrasted with a path of deliberation that it doesn't like. It is contrasted with a path that takes time, a path of process. And what fascism appears in its form of immediacy, it appears as something that can take place swiftly and solve problems swiftly. And so fascism has a very high appeal to impulsive primates. Fascism is a political system of impulse. The problem with fascism is multifaceted. The ultimate problem with fascism is that it leads to the negation of civilization. It is not possible to build an advanced society and develop an advanced species on the basis of fascism. And the reason this is the case is because it is the nature of fascism to remain trapped and locked within the psychology of a psychological splitting, that it divides the world into black or white categories. On one side is the good, and on the other side is evil. And by pivoting back and forth between these two sides, the fascist deceives himself into thinking that he is actually making progress, but he is not making progress. His psychology is merely sabotaging and driving his notion of good and his notion of evil. Whenever something conflicts with his impulse, whenever something goes against what it is that he desires, the kind of system that justifies his pathologies, he calls that the evil, when in fact, in most cases, it is the good. It is the good that is restricting his impulse. It is the good that is calling the primate to deliberation, to a process of rationality, to a process of socialization. But the primate hates it because the impulsive primate wants to smash, wants to give in to the impulse of violence because it feels good. Fascism ultimately leads to the collapse of civilization and the decline of the species. It doesn't matter if at the outset it appears to be a system that makes progress. It is not progress. When values, archaic values, are posited as a solution to plural social systems, and that a narrowing of complexity, a reduction of complexity is posited as the solution, and that reduction is to be carried out on the basis of violence. That is fascism. It can't handle the unfolding of complexity, of the world, of plurality. It's terrified and frightened by it, and because these are impulsive primates, they do not have the capacity to deliberate about plurality, about complexity, and to try to rationally figure out what the most intelligent way to cope with it and to interact with it is. So instead, they attempt to cut it off as a form of contradiction, as an enemy, and to smash it, to persecute it with violence, therefore deluding themselves, deceiving themselves into believing that they have actually made progress. But they have not made progress. They have merely regressed. They have started with a loaded premise of progress. The loaded premise is to posit an archaic value, and that anything that departs from that value is taken to be a sign of decadence. And when that decadence is seen, it must be violently negated, violently eliminated. This is not progress, because the impulsive primate has not thought about what the complexity means, has not thought about what the negation means. They have simply noted the fact that they don't like it and that it contradicts their dogma. And this is what causes them to go after it, to try to destroy it, because they're trying to validate their own bias. Fascism, while at the very beginning it appears to make progress and to bring order, and it does so by scapegoating, by creating an enemy, and then by prosecuting and persecuting that enemy and eliminating that enemy under the delusion that that enemy, that external enemy, was its problem, when its real problem is in its internal enemy. Its internal pathology is its problem. But it does not have the psychological resources to confront this internal pathology. So it projects, it externalizes an enemy, believing that when it has annihilated this enemy, it will have brought itself to a state of utopia. Fascism has its own ideology of utopia. And the problem is, once fascism has annihilated this imaginary enemy, this projection, it realizes that its problems are not gone, and so it simply invents another enemy. It does not have the resources to proceed by any other means than by the psychological act of projection. And as it continues to do this, each sector, each vital rung of society that holds the order together, the diversity that accounts for an expansion in quality, these vital attributes, these vital beings of society are annihilated. They are demonized and annihilated in a form of self-destruction. Fascism will always self-destruct. That's why fascism always has to produce an external enemy, because it cannot maintain its psychological life on its own. It has to have a scapegoat. So it is not possible for the fascist psychology to maintain a social order without a scapegoat. So if it has annihilated the enemies from within, it will then seek enemies from without. And if the world collapses into primate impulse versus primate impulse, you will not have resolution that leads to a higher sublated social order. What you will have, if you have primate impulse versus primate impulse, you will have the will to annihilate the other. And that will exist on both sides. And what will be lacking is the ability, the vitality of the process of rational deliberation, which in truth is the only thing that can bring about a pacification of tension between human bodies. Violence begets more violence. And the problem with the fascist project, which is unconscious of itself, is that it is a project that is doomed. It is a project that is incompetent, incapable of sustaining a just and civil social order. It works by means of brute force. It works by means of simple dichotomies. That splitting is so vital and crucial to fascism because it's how it convinces itself that it is doing what is good, that it is doing what is civil. It uses projection, scapegoating, psychological splitting to make itself feel superior, to make itself feel like it is making progress. But it is not making progress, because in the concrete world, it's destroying real human lives that have real social value. And fascism, on the basis of its psychological splitting, on the basis of its delusional projection, destroys those lives, which have the end result of negating and detracting from the quality of society. And fascism cannot help itself in this sense. It is almost predestined because it is not a deliberative movement. It is a pathological movement in society. It is a movement where human pathology is dictating politics. Human pathology is dictating law. Human pathology is dictating the outcome of the social order, directing and shaping that order as it is defensively reacting within its own psychological disposition. And this is unsustainable. In the long run, fascism not only projects and destroys and persecutes an external enemy, but it ultimately will destroy itself. And there is no way it can escape this, because all of the people who tried to warn it that it was heading down a destructive, a self-destructive path, it annihilated those people because it did not like what they said. It did not like their contrarian position. It did not like their negation of its own egotistical, self-validating form.